Hello everyone, welcome to Beyond the Dome, the first exploration of the upper passage beyond Dome Pit and Natural Bridge Caverns. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bennett Lee. I've been an avid caver since the 1980s. However, I visited my first two caves when I was a little kid in the 1970s. Those two caves happened to be Cascade Caverns and Natural Bridge Caverns. Even as a child, I was amazed at how beautiful Natural Bridge Caverns is. I'm also a cave photographer. I've been doing that since 2012. I've been fortunate enough to capture some amazing images underground that have been seen worldwide, and my work in cave photography is what got me invited to Natural Bridge Caverns to photo document this expedition. A quick side note, I did give this presentation recently at the Bear Grotto, which is our local caving club in San Antonio. I'm honored to have had Orion Knox attend my presentation. He's one of the original explorers of Natural Bridge Caverns. Also at the presentation were the owners of Natural Bridge Caverns, Joy West and her two sons, Brad and Travis West. Brad and Travis are the third generation owners and operators of Natural Bridge Caverns. It was a great privilege and honor to have both the West family and Orion Knox attend my presentation, and I want to thank you all for being there. Here is Natural Bridge Caverns with the namesake Natural Bridge spanning the entrance. For those of you who don't know about Natural Bridge Caverns, it's located just northeast of San Antonio, Texas. We know from archaeological digs that Natural Bridge had human activity in it 6,000 years ago. We also know that it was partially explored in the early to mid-1900s. However, the big push for exploration didn't start until January 3, 1960, when a group of St. Mary's University students visited the West Ranch and asked to explore a cave on their property. They made multiple trips there over the next several months, and they discovered a massive, highly decorated cave system. It was so impressive that it was actually considered for a national or state park. They had both national and state park representatives come out and look at the cave. Unfortunately, both had to decline for funding reasons. So the owner, Clara West Heidman, decided to develop it into a commercial cave on her own. She enlisted the help of Orion Knox and Jack Birch. Jack Birch is famous for his work at Caverns of Sonora, which is another world-class show cave in Texas. They also discovered the South Caverns, just south of the entrance to Natural Bridge. That was discovered and developed in 1967 and 1968. However, since 1968, there have been no new passages discovered at Natural Bridge. Let's take a look at the map of Natural Bridge Caverns. For those of you who don't know how to read a cave map, on this map specifically, north is roughly to the right, south is roughly to the left. The upper portion of this map is the side view, also called the profile. The lower portion is the overhead view looking down, also called the plan view. And for a sense of scale, from the southernmost point in the cave on the far left to the northernmost point on the far right is a little less than 1 mile. However, in total, the Natural Bridge Cavern system has over 2 miles of passage. What you see in red here is the main tourist trail called the Discovery Tour. There's also a Hidden Passages Tour in the South Caverns to the left, but where we're headed is the Dome Pit in the far north of the cavern system, well off of any tourist trail. For the rest of the presentation, we'll be looking at this area of the map so you have a sense of scale of where we are in the cave system. This is our objective, this lead at the top of Dome Pit. You might be asking, why are we looking at Dome Pit? The farthest north anyone has ever been in Natural Bridge is the River Styx. Orion was the first person to go down there. I haven't been there yet myself, but my understanding is that it's pretty miserable getting down into it, miserable once you're in there, and simply no leads in the River Styx area. So that pretty much ended the northern exploration of Natural Bridge Caverns. If you notice, there is a well that they drilled to tap into that water source. When they drilled, that well shaft intersected a void where that white box is. Looking at the map, there seems to be a nice horizontal line that goes all the way across to that intersection. So, if we can get to the top of Dome Pit, we will likely find passage that continues to the well shaft and hopefully beyond so that we can get further north in the cavern system than anyone has ever been before. Dome Pit was first discovered on April 14, 1960. Cavers came in at the bottom of Dome Pit. They had carbide headlamps on their helmets. If you don't know what those are, you can think of them like a candle with a little reflector behind it. Very dim, especially in comparison with our modern lights. They're at the bottom of Dome Pit, looking up with their weak carbide lights, and they can just barely see that maybe there's something up at the top, but they can't be sure. Later, they were able to find passage at the top of Dome Pit on the opposite side. From that position, they were able to see that there was definitely a passage up there, but they couldn't tell if it continued beyond. Unfortunately, there was no way to reach that upper passage. Dome Pit is 90 feet high, The walls are really crumbly, so you can't climb up to the passage. Likewise, there's no way to traverse from the passage on the opposite side. So that lead at the top of Dome Pit essentially became inaccessible. However, there were some additional leads in the passage back to the river Styx. The hope was that these leads would connect to the assumed passage between Dome Pit and the well shaft. Orion Knox climbed these leads, and unfortunately, those leads didn't go anywhere. And there went the hopes of reaching that assumed passage. The situation remained that way for 40 years until the year 2000. Joe Ivy, who was a well-known Texas caver, was helping train staff at Natural Bridge, and they asked him if he would bolt climb to the top of Dome Pit. So that passage suddenly became a viable lead again. Unfortunately, Joe Ivy died doing an almost identical bolt climb at the bottom of 09 Well, and that dashed the hopes of reaching that passage once again. The status remained unchanged for almost another 20 years until one day Bill Steele was talking to Orion Knox and asked if there were any good leads left at Natural Bridge. Orion said, "Oh yes, the top of Dome Pit." That got Bill excited and sparked a renewed interest in that lead at the top of Dome Pit. That conversation essentially became the catalyst for this entire expedition. So with this renewed interest, Greg Passmore, who was already working with Natural Bridge Caverns to do 3D LiDAR mapping of their cave, I've seen some VR demos of their work, it is really cool stuff. He agreed to get a crew together to fly a drone to the top of Dome Pit and into the entrance of that passage. When they did that, they saw beautiful white flowstone, possible pools, what looked like huge passage continuing on beyond that flowstone. Now with video footage showing potentially huge passage at the top of Dome Pit, Bill Steele arranges for Lee White to travel with him on the way back from the month-long Huautla expedition down in Mexico, come through Texas, and stop by Natural Bridge Caverns to bolt climb Dome Pit. Lee White is a tag caver. That means he comes from the Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia area. They have a lot of caves there and a lot of deep pits. Lee White is renowned for his bolt climbing abilities. I want to give a quick side note here and mention that Lee White died in a car accident a few months after this expedition. It was a huge loss to the caving community, and I'm glad I had an opportunity to go caving with him on this expedition. Let's take a look at that drone footage. Here's the drone at the bottom of Dome Pit. They're going to fly it all the way to the top and push it into that upper passage. This drone is very expensive. It's worth thousands of US dollars. The radio frequencies that control this drone do not transmit through solid rock. So if they lose sight of the drone or push it too far into the passage, they could crash it in a place that no one has ever been able to access. Bam, there goes thousands of dollars. That's the entrance to the lake passage that leads to the river Styx. Lots of beautiful formations lining that entrance. Now they're at the top and about to push into that upper passage. Remember, this is the first look that anyone has ever seen of what's in the passage at the top of Dome Pit. We've been waiting nearly 60 years to see this. Light comes on, and here's our first look. Nice formations on the left. In the middle is a big pile of bat guano. Now they're pushing into the upper passage. Remember, if they push too far in, they could lose signal and crash. If they hit the wall or ceiling, they'll crash. Water dripping on the motors or blades can cause it to crash. In the back, that looks like a solid wall. As they push in further, you can see a vertical shadow that shows you there's a break in the middle. It looks like there's some open space below. Beautiful white flowstone on the floor. Maybe a pool on the left and another on the right. And you can see the black void of obvious passage continuing onward. For reference, that's about 10 to 15 feet high, about 3 to 5 meters, huge walking passage. And so here it is, visual confirmation of definite passage at the top of Dome Pit. It's time to get this expedition started. With that video confirmation, Natural Bridge Caverns starts putting together an expedition. They plan to have Lee White climb on May 8th, 2019. They also want to document this historic moment with lots of photos and video, multiple drones to capture footage of Lee as he's climbing. Obviously, we need lighting to see what's happening. Plus, we have all of the vertical gear and ropes. In total, we're hauling hundreds of pounds of gear deep into the cave, and that requires a huge support team and lots of coordination. Remember that the last new passage discovered at Natural Bridge was discovered over 50 years ago, before the current owners were even born. This is an opportunity for them to find new passage and contribute to their family legacy. And as a huge bonus, we're going to have Orion Knox, one of the original explorers and developers, join us on this expedition. Here's Lee White getting his gear together. Orion Knox on the left, Bill Steele with his Texas Cave Pack. Here's a group photo of us right before we go in. On the left with that burly white beard is Bill Steele. The lovely lady in the pink blouse is Joy West, and those are her sons on her sides. On the left in the white helmet is Travis West. He's Vice President of Natural Bridge. On the right in the red helmet is Brad West. He's President. On the far right is Orion Knox, and right next to him with that stern look on his face is Lee White. After months of planning and prep work, our expedition is finally underway. Here's a shot of Orion Knox at one of the first climbs in the cave. Shortly after that, we go through this 50-foot squeeze called the Birth Canal. It's actually a nice belly crawl, a smooth, slick surface to slide across, nice breeze, but that's where the niceties ended. After the belly crawl, we get into some really nasty mud. Unfortunately, the mud ripped off the bottom of Orion's shoe, so he had to return to the surface. He did make it about as far as that red box, so about 2/3 of the way back to Dome Pit. I did get a nice shot of Orion and Brad West together in the cave. And if you look at the mud on the ground, that's actually some of the nicer mud that we encountered. Nice probably isn't the right word. Let's say this boot-sucking mud is less horrible than the other mud on this expedition. Let's talk about the mud, because the mud is a significant factor in these expeditions. At the beginning, it's not too muddy. You've got this one-footed mudslide that's fun on the way out, but a little difficult getting up on the way in. After the birth canal, there are pools of sloppy mud. This is really watery mud, almost like a watery gravy. When you first come out of the birth canal, it's a stoop walk. I'm tall, so it's a little difficult to stoop walk, but I certainly didn't want to crawl through the mud. After that, it's a little thicker and starts turning into this boot-sucking mud. That's where Orion lost the bottom of his shoe. Over by the Dome Pit is really sticky mud. Clings to everything, covers all the rocks, makes everything slippery. And down in this area is thigh-deep mud, like literally thigh-deep. At least on me, I'm a tall guy. Some of the shorter guys who had it easier back in the stoop walking sunk down to their hips in this mud. And there's some steep slopes in this area, really steep embankments of mud. One of them in particular is about 20 feet high at a 60 or 70 degree angle. And you're climbing up this embankment and there's nothing solid underneath you. Every step you take, when you put your weight down on your foot, the mud wall under your foot wants to collapse and send you tumbling down 20 feet. This is a really horrible, treacherous area. But the worst mud of all is this area in the upper passage. This is the stickiest mud that I've ever encountered. Every step would add another layer of mud to your boot. And I carry a 50-pound pack full of camera gear and cave gear. And on top of that, I'm now carrying another 30 pounds of mud. 10 pounds of mud on each shoe. More mud scattered all around my clothes and pack and gear. And you're not just carrying all that extra mud. Every step you sink into the mud. And that takes more effort to pull your boot out of the mud. And you have that extra 10 pounds of mud on your shoe. And you still have to lift your leg higher than normal to get it above the mud that you sank into. You take your next step forward and you sink into the mud again. It's physically exhausting. Worst mud that I've ever encountered in over 30 years of caving. But don't just take my word for it. Let's hear what Bill Steele has to say about the mud. Bill Steele is a world-renowned caver. He's been caving since the 1960s. He's caved all over the world. Let's hear his thoughts about the mud at Natural Bridge.
Tell me a little about the mud. The mud's kind of famous back there. We can tell you a little bit about it.
Yeah, I've been caving a long time. I've been in a lot of mud, a lot of Texas mud even, but this is special mud. This is a sticky, heady mud. So it gets on your clothes, it gets on your boots. Your boots might go from weighing 1.5 pounds to weighing 8 pounds each. The ropes got real muddy. I mean, we just took them in today. They were brand new, shiny white, and we had the cinders slipping on it. So there was globs of mud on the rope.
Here's some examples of that mud. So nasty. This is some of the mud we had to walk through. This is at the bottom of the Dome Pit. Thick, sticky mud. Some of the soupy mud puddles we have to walk through. Really horrible stuff. Here's a shot of my boot. If you're a little confused, those are my shoelaces. You can see in the shadow on the left, there's about 2 or 3 inches of mud stuck to the side of my boot. Same thing on the right, about 2 or 3 inches of mud there. The top of my shoe is covered in mud. You can see a big clump of mud stuck on the toe. Side shot of my boot. Again, if you're confused, that's a shoelace on top. On the right, you can see the back of my boot in the shadow. And yes, all of that mud is attached to my boot. And this stuff doesn't shake off. You think with gravity it would just fall off, but you can't even shake it off. I've got mud on the back, mud on the sides, mud on the toe, mud going up my leg. It's really miserable. And every now and then you'd stop because you're so exhausted from carrying all this extra mud around. You bend over and scrape off as much mud as you can, and then 2 or 3 steps later, you have just as much mud caked all over your boots. It was an exhausting, relentless onslaught. Here's some of our gear. I want to note that this is our gear after we scraped off the mud, so these are our clean packs. And if you look in the top right, you see that blue, and those are latex gloves that we packed with us. Our normal caving gloves became so saturated when we were going through the cave that the mud soaked through our gloves and made our hands almost as muddy as the gloves themselves. So if we wanted to eat food or I wanted to take out my camera, I take off my muddy gloves, think I'm going to have clean hands underneath, but they're coated in mud. So we had to put on these latex gloves whenever we needed to handle something with relatively clean hands. That's just a little about the mud we have to deal with on every trip back here. Let's get back to our journey to Dome Pit. After you go through the birth canal and that sloppy mud, you get to a place called Belayman's Bluff. This is a hole in the passage that opens up into the ceiling of the Inferno Room. Here's a shot of Bill Steele, who's rappelling down from Belayman's Bluff. Now, unfortunately, not all of our support staff was vertically trained, so we made the decision on this expedition not to send anyone up and down the rope. Instead, we lowered our gear at Belayman's Bluff, then we went down an area called Satan's Pit Passage. That's the squiggly passage marked in red on the map. At the bottom of that, there's a 20-foot drop. We rigged that with a cable ladder. And then we had support staff whose sole purpose was to wait in the Inferno Room for our gear, then carry it across that thigh-deep mud and steep embankments and give it back to us at the bottom of Satan's Pit Passage. If you're wondering why we didn't take our gear with us through Satan's Pit Passage, it's because with a name like that, you know it's not going to be a pleasant experience. This area has numerous squeezes and really sketchy climbs. In fact, I just recently learned that long ago when he first went through, Joe Ivy had directions from Orion Knox about how to get to the bottom. When Joe Ivy got to one climb in this section, he said, "This is way too dangerous. We're going to need to rig this with rope and go up and down with vertical gear. This can't be the way Orion told us to go." So they went another route and never got to the bottom because that is the way Orion told them how to go. We didn't want to haul hundreds of pounds of gear through squeezes and climbs like that, so that's why we lowered it at Belayman's Bluff. That's not to say this section is all bad. It has some beautiful formations in it. Here's an example with some beautiful flowstone and soda straws. Here's that 20-foot climb. This is from a trip when we rigged it with rope instead of a cable ladder. But before you get to that 20-foot drop, you have to wade through this soupy mud pool. It stretches wall to wall and it's almost right up to the lip of that drop. If you're careful, you can hold onto the wall and skirt along the side of it, but if you slip, you're going to face plant into that soupy mud. Once we're across that soupy mud and down the 20-foot drop, it's a relatively easy walk to Dome Pit, and we're finally here. There's Lee White getting his gear ready. Bill Steele getting ready to belay. For those of you who don't know how bolt climbing works, it's different than our normal vertical caving where we climb a static rope using our ascenders. Instead, Lee's using a dynamic rope, which has more stretch to help absorb the impact in case he falls. And if he falls, Bill will catch him with that rope. To climb, Lee is going to take that battery-powered drill hanging from his harness, reach up on the wall as high as he can, and drill a hole into the rock. Next, to put an anchor bolt into that hole and attach the rope to it, then he'll climb up to the bolt and hang from it. He'll repeat that process, reach up, drill, put a bolt in, climb to it, over and over until he reaches the top. Here's Lee putting in his first bolt. He's on a big shelf up there. It's a relatively easy climb to get up to that good solid wall. I want to point out that there are actually 4 people in this photo. In case you missed him, here's Bill Steele camouflaged in mud. Great shot of Lee putting in that first bolt with a drone flying in the foreground. Another shot of Lee in a drone. Let's take a look at some of that video footage from the drones. Usually there were 2 drones flying around. One was a camera drone and the other was a lighting drone, and the 2 would work in conjunction with each other. It got a little noisy, but it was pretty cool to see Lee on the wall and these drones flying up to him. In this shot, if you look straight down, the middle, there's a beautiful lake right at the bottom with formations all along the sides. That's the lake passage that leads down to the River Styx. All right, that was one drone. And that was two. So you can tell it got pretty noisy when both drones were flying around. But they produced some unique video like this great overhead shot. An awesome experience to have drones documenting this expedition. While those drones are flying around, I'm still taking photographs. These next two photographs combined are two of my favorite photos that I took on this trip because I think they really capture the essence of this expedition. Lee White's pretty high up on the wall at this point, so I had to zoom in to get this one. I love the shot of him. You can see he's hanging off that bolt. You can feel the tension in that taut tether going down to his left foot. His legs are spread apart wide for balance. There's all that gear hanging off his back. And best of all, you can see Lee's face, because normally he's looking up or looking at the wall, but in this instance he's reaching back for more gear. And at the same time, I was still able to get some of those formations next to him. At the very top, you can see those thin curtains that become the beautiful round flowstone. Then that flowstone becomes curtains again, and all those beautiful wavy folds and lines that flow and merge together. On the left, you see that tall burnt orange column with all those vertical lines in it, and that verticality is cut by the horizontal lines from the flowstone in the column. On the lower left, you see that creamy white that contrasts with the orange, and then the white overlaps the orange, and the orange overlaps the white, and then you pull back. There's Lee, hanging from that same bolt with the same stance in his legs and arms, but he's nothing more than a speck on the wall. And you realize all those formations you just saw are only a small portion of a much larger formation. It starts near the top of Dome Pit, flows down the wall for 20 or 30 feet with dozens of alternating layers of flowstone and curtains. That column you saw extends another 30 feet below that with even wider whites on it. And all those details and nuances that I pointed out in the previous photograph are lost in the sheer size of this massive formation. And both Lee and this formation are dwarfed by the size of Dome Pit. And this isn't even all of Dome Pit. This is just a portion of the wall that Lee was climbing. This wall actually extends further to the left with floor-to-ceiling formations over there. You can't see the floor because it's down another 20 feet in the lower left. On the right, there's a huge wall that runs in parallel, and it's just as big as this left wall. There's huge borehole walking passage behind us. Over that mound in the bottom right is the lake passage that leads to the River Styx. It's lined with 30 to 40 foot high formations on both sides. It's just awe-inspiring to be in this huge underground room. If you didn't catch the spoilers earlier in the presentation, yes, Lee White did make it to the top of Dome Pit. Here he is rigging a static line that the rest of us are going to climb up and down. All right, while he's up there rigging that line, here's an in-cave interview with the owners, Brad and Travis West. Let's hear what they have to say.
Here we are in the Dome Pit, and it's about 4:15 right now, and Lee White is way up there, and he is in the upper lead. What, it's taking about an hour and a half to get up there, Travis?
That was about. He started rigging his gear about 1 o'clock, setting everything up, laying all his gear out, getting suited up, and he started the climb sometime between 1:15 to 1:30, and it basically got up at about, I think it was 3:15, you said?
Yeah, 3:15. So it took him an hour and a half. So he's
maybe a little over. Yeah.
He's the tag spider monkey, I guess. He's awesome.
It was amazing.
Yeah, really amazing. So we are all really excited about this. So
Really sad Orion couldn't make it all the way back here. He started out coming in, and the bottom of his shoe completely blew out, and before we even got back into the pit passage area. So Orion had to turn around and go back out, and
yeah, but Orion he's 78 years old, and just it's amazing that he came back in on this expedition to the point where he did. Really excited that he was with us at the beginning, and Orion is he's so excited. This is almost 60 years that he's been waiting to find out what this upper level passage does, and today we are going to go where no man has gone before, and we're going to gently place our feet up there in undiscovered passage.
check it out. All right, so better start climbing because I can't go up to
Okay, all right, time for me to get up there.
Here's Travis, he's about to climb up. Now, the passage actually continues down between those formations. Those are some of the formations that line the entrance to the lake passage. Lee White looking out from the top of Dome Pit. If you remember that pile of guano from the first drone footage at the top of Dome Pit, this is it. We took a sample of this guano as well as a sample further back in this upper passage and had those samples tested in a lab. This guano pile tested to be 7,500 years old. The one further back was 6,400 years old. Both those dates correspond to a collapse at the entrance when bats likely lost access to the cave. I like that on this expedition we were able to reinforce those dates from the archaeological digs at the entrance with the dates of these guano piles further back in the cave that have been undisturbed for thousands of years. They also tested a huge pile of guano in the Hall of the Mountain King at the end of the tourist trail. That one tested to be 15,000 years old. So we know that bats were using Natural Bridge Caverns for thousands and thousands of years. That's to be expected because right next to Natural Bridge is Bracken Bat Cave. Bracken has long been home of the largest bat colony in the world, with historically 20 to 40 million bats living there each summer. So it makes sense that some of the bats would stay in the adjacent Natural Bridge Caverns. Right behind that guano pile is this spectacular pool that you caught a glimpse of in that first drone footage video. This is about 6 feet across from left to right, about 4 feet front to back, and about 3 feet deep in the shadows in the center. I love this shot with that reflection in the pool. Pools like this usually stay a fairly constant water level. However, this pool has been different every trip. This is the highest we've seen it. Water's up to the travertine dams at the right and the bottom of the photo. We've seen it as low as the bottom of that shelf that outlines the shadows in the middle. It's different every trip so far. Up above that pool is the white flowstone with small travertine dams, and in those dams are these tiny crystalline structures. Very small, very delicate. Here's some of that white flowstone. I love this photograph too. These dams are pretty small. The larger ones with the tiny crystalline structures in them are only a few inches across. Below that white flowstone are these larger travertine dams with pea-sized formations in them. Pool in one of those dams. Close up of those pea-sized formations. I love all the white crystals growing all over them. This is really a beautiful area. Just beyond all those formations and travertine dams, it starts getting really muddy like I talked about previously. The entire passage, the floor, the walls, the ceiling, the rocks are all coated with this brown mud. Occasionally on top of that drab-colored mud are clean white formations like this little stalactite drapery. Here's a curving one running down this otherwise brown wall. Plus there are these pristine white stalactites. I'm amazed at how white these are when everything around it is mud. On the floor there are lots of patches of white flowstone on top of the mud. This flowstone here has a tiny pool in it. It's only a few inches across, lined with these miniature crystalline structures. Beautiful white and all of this mud. All that is beautiful, but our focus is exploration and pushing this upper lead. So let's get back on track. Here are the owners, Brad and Travis West, leading the way in the Virgin Passage.
Okay, here we are in the upper lead, and this is Virgin Passage. No foot has ever crossed here. So let's go check it out.
Let's do.
This spot is really treacherous. It's a smooth slope. It's covered in mud. You can't hold on to the walls because they're crumbly mud. And if you slip, you'll slide straight into this offset hole at the bottom and break your leg.
You can be 40, you can be 25.
This is what almost the entire passage was like. These huge canyon passages with the floor and walls covered in this thick, sticky mud. You can see our footprints in that thick mud. And that gray stuff is actually from the well shaft. We'll talk about that in just a minute. A deep crevasse along this wall drops down about 90 feet. And at the top of this, you can see another natural bridge at Natural Bridge Caverns. Some sections of this passage were beautiful at one time with amazing dark formations, but it's all been covered in this thick mud. Now here's an example. You can just barely see the dark flowstone and curtains under that layer of brown mud.
We've hit a it's like we've hit another joint, right?
It appears that way.
And because it does not continue straight anymore.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't look like it does at all.
It comes up and now it seems like it just Y's.
Unless if you work your way down, we could get
Yeah, from down
below.
Down below it may continue on straight, but here, yeah, it's like it hit a joint and it's going off. Well, I think this is good. Good point to stop, buddy.
I think it's a good point to turn around too.
Right here, man.
Here's that gray stuff you saw in the video. Now, this is a slurry from when they drilled the well shaft and installed the pipe. It's basically a thin layer of cement that coated everything. Now, this was really exciting to find because this gave us visual confirmation that we were at the well shaft. What made it really exciting is that by this time, we've been underground about 8 or 9 hours. We're walking through Virgin Passage with only a vague idea where we are. Then we see this gray slurry, and now we can pinpoint on the map exactly where we are, where the well shaft intersects that void. This is a big fist bump high five moment for us because we've made our objective. We know that anything we do beyond this is going to be pushing the cavern system further north than anyone has ever been. Here's some soda straws that started growing after the well was installed. We never found the actual well pipe itself, but clearly it is in the immediate vicinity with all this gray slurry. I think this is interesting. Normally we don't find things this clearly defined. We've got that rich brown on the left, that pristine white in the middle, and that dark brown, almost black on the right. You can even see a little bit of that black underneath the white. We've completed our initial exploration. We're back at the top of Dome Pit. Let's hear what the owners have to say about their journey through this Virgin Passage.
Here we are. We've just pushed the upper lead, and we have pushed the cavern system further than it's ever been on this expedition. We got up into the lead about 5 o'clock, and we gave ourselves 3 hours to explore. And it's about 8 o'clock, and we've got part of the team gearing up to descend. And so one of our objectives was to make it to the well shaft.
Yep, that was a physical marker on the surface that we knew that had intersected the cavern system at the lower levels at about the furthest that anybody had ever been. And we actually got to a point where we could see where the cuttings from when the well was drilled had come through the passage where we were in.
Yeah.
And so we knew we were there, and then we actually passed that.
Yep, so we went past that, and so that's really about the furthest you can get in the lower cave, is to that point.
Yep, just beyond that point.
Yeah.
Right.
And so we continued, the passage kept on going, and we had to crawl over some breakdown, and it's just a vertical joint with chunks of breakdown, and it's a maze like Satan's Pit Passage back there.
It really is.
Yeah, and we got to
but it opened back up shortly after that. It looked like it was kind of getting narrowing down, and then it opened up into actually a big walking passage.
Right.
And it was really pretty, kind of like a box canyon looking passage.
Yeah, and along the way we've seen numerous pits dropping down to lower levels. Right where the well was drilled, it's a pretty deep pit right there. It goes down a good 45 feet.
I could see 40 or 50 feet at least, and I wasn't wasn't going to look any further.
So we kept going, and so we made it about 200 feet past the well. So we've now gone 600 feet in this upper level lead, and we came to what we felt was a perfect stopping point. We intersected another joint, and so we had cave passage going to our left and to our right, and we could see, to the right maybe 80 feet, and to the left maybe 60 or 70 feet.
There's really pretty little formations right there to the left. Little soda straws and stalagmites and stalactites and some real pretty flowstone right there.
Yeah.
So it was awesome. It was really neat to. The most amazing thing was just to go and know that you were the first people to ever be there.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. It was just awesome.
Yeah, incredible experience.
Yeah.
So.
Here's Brad heading down Dome Pit. Behind him you can see the top of that huge formation that I pointed out while Lee White was climbing. Also, take a look at the pile on the right. That's all loose rock, held in place by that sticky mud. This is the one instance in which I'm thankful for how sticky that mud is up there. It is literally holding several tons of rock in place. Thank you, mud. That's the only time I'm going to praise the mud up there. So as we're wrapping up this expedition, let's hear what Brad and Travis have to say as they come down Dome Pit.
Welcome back.
Off-road!
You look a little muddy.
Oh, man.
It is filthy up there.
Oh, man. What a ride. That awesome, Travis? Oh, my gosh. So dirty. Off-road?
Okay, on the road. Welcome back.
Man, it went. It went.
It still goes.
It went.
Yep. Lay over it, boys.
Unfortunately, it is over. At least this trip. We have been back several times and made even more fantastic discoveries, and as promised, I'll show you some photos from the subsequent trips. But first, there are some people who I want to thank. First of all, big thanks to everyone at Natural Bridge Caverns. If you want more information or would like a tour, you can find them at naturalbridgecaverns.com. But especially from Natural Bridge, I'd like to thank the owners, Brad and Travis West. They provided a lot of history leading up to this expedition. They are great guys, great family. Big thanks to Greg Passmore and his company Passmore Labs for the drones and additional video footage. If you get the chance, check out their great 3D modeling and VR demos. Of course, the hero of this trip is the late Lee White, who got us to the top of Dome Pit. Shout out to Bill Steele for getting this entire expedition started. Most especially a big thanks to Orion Knox. He shared all of his original exploration notes with me for this presentation. I got a lot of great info from him. He's also given his own presentations to our local caving club about the early exploration and development at Natural Bridge, and has even given our group a personally guided tour at Natural Bridge Caverns. So big thanks to him for his decades of contributions to the Texas caving community. Again, my name is Bennett Lee. If you're interested in seeing more of my cave photography and adventures, you can visit me at bennettlee.com. That's the end of the initial exploration. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Let's pick up where the initial exploration ended. This is the left passage of that T intersection where the owners turned around. Beautiful flowstone and delicate translucent soda straws. The passage continues beyond the formations, so we have to crawl around the side. Here's a close-up of some broken soda straws. You can see how thin and delicate and translucent these soda straws are. What's interesting is that these were broken before we got there. These and a lot more. I assume they were broken by the bats that roosted here thousands of years ago on the other side of these formations and occasionally hit some as they flew through. Here's the other side looking back. We crawled into this room from the left side of that photo. On the right side you can see a lot more broken soda straws, starting at the top of the mud and continuing all the way down the mud slope to the right. Beautiful flowstone, beautiful colors, and those thin, delicate soda straws are just stunning. Here's one of the bats I've talked about. We found this bat skeleton right before the T intersection. We tried to collect this to get a date on this bat, but the bones were so brittle that they were crumbling to dust when we tried to collect it, and unfortunately that didn't leave enough material to test. That T intersection is about 200 feet beyond the well shaft, and unfortunately both directions at that T intersection ended after about 150 feet in each direction. So bad news for us. No going passage, no big spectacular rooms, and no huge formations like the main caverns. And that trip we decided to descend that big crevasse at the well shaft because we assumed it connected to the River Styx area. However, that crevasse doesn't connect to the River Styx and instead branches off into a whole new section. And this is where it really gets exciting. Huge rooms, massive formations, and unbelievable colors. The new passage starts off with these huge travertine dams and crystal clear pools. You can see Brad and Travis West in the back. The passage continues up that flowstone behind them. If you see mud on the travertine dams at the bottom, we didn't do that. That has actually fallen off the roof and is calcified in place. We've been very careful in these sections to keep them as clean as possible. Also, if you look at that tiny pool in the very front, this is a close-up of that pool. It's only about 10 inches across, but it drops down about 4 feet. All the pools are like that, about 4 feet deep. Here's looking back from the other side. You can see how thin those dams are and how deep the pools get. Also, I want to note everyone's clean clothes. After that first trip, we realized that we need to pack an entirely new set of clothes to keep these areas clean. The first trip, we were walking around in our socks to keep our muddy shoes off the pristine areas. Careful not to touch anything with our muddy clothes and gloves. Now we pack a whole new set of clothes. And here's why. After the travertine dams, we get into this room, the Frozen Falls chamber, and at the bottom of it is Mirror Lake. The flowstone in this room is massive, beautiful colors. I love the stripes in that one in the top right. Here's a shot of that flowstone, simply gorgeous. I love the colors. And if you remember from that previous photo, that flowstone in the bottom left continues down, and it actually wraps around the corner and creates this huge flowstone, the size of a barn. Absolutely massive. That's Brad standing in the bottom. Where he is used to be a pool that went all the way up to the bottom of that flowstone and was part of Mirror Lake when the water levels were higher. Behind him is a pit that drops down into a lower level. We haven't explored that yet, but there's water visible and likely contributes to the river Styx. Here's a later trip where we were transmitting our precise location to the surface using a cave radio. This creates a magnetic field that can transmit through hundreds of feet of solid rock. We can pinpoint that magnetic field on the surface. We did that because in the future we're looking at drilling a shaft into this new area so we can access it without going through all that mud. That way we can come into these rooms clean and keep everything pristine. Now here's the back corner of that room. More beautiful flowstone and a lovely pool with these little lily pad formations on the right side. Close up of those lily pads in the pool. The floor in that area. Intricate little dams and pools filled with tiny spiky formations. The photos of the big rooms are really dramatic, but there is beauty in just the small details like this. And this is everywhere in these sections. Just overwhelming. Here's another look at the bottom of the Frozen Falls chamber in Mirror Lake. Note that this was our first time in this room. We didn't have a change of clothes, so Brad and Travis walked across that floor in their socks so they wouldn't track mud across it. It looks like there's passage on the left, but actually that's a solid wall around the other side of the corner. To the right is that area I showed you with that massive flowstone in the pit. But the main passage actually continues up this flowstone into an area we call Flowstone Hall. Again, a huge flowstone about 30 feet wide. We have to stoop walk across because the ceiling has all these soda straws and stalactites. At the end of Flowstone Hall is this amazing bowl. These are rare formations, especially this size. This one is about 2 feet across and about 2 feet deep, and you can see why we had to stoop walk with all the formations on the ceiling. Here you can see a better shot of that bowl. What is really unusual about this one is that it's been encased by the flowstone. I've seen bowls before, but not this size and not encased in flowstone. Spectacular find. Right after Flowstone Hall and that bowl is a slope that leads up into Midnight Dome. Huge room, highly decorated, stunning colors. I've never seen this many colors in a single cave location. We called it Midnight Dome because the first time we saw it from below, we didn't see all these colors. We came in from the other side of these formations, from down below where the rocks and formations were covered with black. Not dirt, but a calcified black. Like this. That's not wet mud. That is hard black calcification covering everything. Covering the formations. Here's a typical yellowish orange formation covered in black. It wasn't just small patches of black. It was a broad expanse of black. Here it is covering the mud and breakdown in the foreground, spreading over that orange formation. You can see it continuing across the flowstone to the back. And then that white came in later and flowed on top of the black. So you have layers upon layers of colors in the room and made for some unbelievable colors packed into tiny areas. Like this. These colors aren't photoshopped in. These are the colors that are there naturally. Brilliant orange right in the middle, typical yellows we find in cave formations, rosy pinks, that bright white in the top left. There's darker patches with a greenish hue. And that greenish hue is caused by the black being covered by a thin layer of the yellows and oranges. As the colors bleed together, you get that greenish hue. Again, just so many intense colors packed into such a tiny area. And that previous photo is just the bottom area of this larger photo. Now you can see brighter yellows, more of the black, huge formations in this area. The passage continues beyond Midnight Dome. We get into more breakdown, more areas with formations. Here's one of the other pools that we found. More colorful formations. This one is called Neapolitan Ice Cream. I thought that when I first saw it, and later without any prompting, another guy in our group said it looked like Neapolitan ice cream, hence the name. Delicate soda straws and helictites. At the end of our current exploration, we came to this highly decorated little room. Lots of formations. That soda straw on the right actually connected, so that's technically a soda straw column now. Lots of these tall, skinny stalagmites. Look at the orange on the top of that smaller one. Great colors. This one is amazing. Yellow on top, orange in the middle, brown on the bottom. Unfortunately, this room has an undercut ledge that drops 20 feet. Those formations lit up in the background are actually about 25 feet away on the floor, the adjacent room. There's no way to climb down. We didn't bring any vertical gear with us this far back. The room below slopes down to the right and to the back and appears to continue, but at the time of this video, this is the farthest we've been. But we do have plans to go back, so hopefully in the future we'll have good news to report of continuing the passage. We did not get after shots of that first expedition, but we have for most of the subsequent trips. This one is particularly notable because we came out hours apart. We'd been caving for 18 to 20 hours. We started at 9 in the morning. The first team got out at 3 a.m. the morning of the next day. No sleep, caving 18 hours straight. They wanted nothing more than to take off those filthy clothes, wash off the mud, and get clean. But they stayed in their dirty clothes another 2 hours until all the teams were out. I was on the last team. We got out at 5 in the morning, and despite being 5 a.m., we all still had huge grins on our faces because this is such a phenomenal caving expedition, despite all the mud. That after shot is the end of the presentation, unless... I'm just kidding. Wait until the next presentation. That is the end. Once again, my name is Bennett Lee. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and if you liked it, be sure to subscribe and check out my website at bennettlee.com for more great content.